introduction. And listen really carefully. We offer courses in environmental studies and environmental sciences from various faculty across the curriculum. Dr. Robert Williams teaches, Dr. Willietta Gibson may teach a course in environmental studies, as well as myself, Dr. Valerie Ann Johnson. So you can choose to take a course, and I would suggest that you do so, especially after you hear today's talk. So,
Now, IS 357, Learning for Leaders, taught by Auntie Johnson, helping me learn what it takes to be a leader in environmental policy and environmental justice. We will now hear from a major leader in the environmental movement. We are pleased to have with us today Dr. Robert K. Accomplished author. His book include Hope for a Heated Planet, How Americans Are Fighting Global Warming and Building a Better Future. Rachel Carson and her sisters, Extraordinary Women Who Have Shaped America's Environment, and Washington in Spring, a nature journal for a changing capital. As a communicator, Dr. Musil was the executive producer and the host of Consider the Alternatives, a half-hour weekly radio program syndicated to over 150 stations with over 200,000 listeners. He has been the producer of numerous groundbreaking independent video documentaries and public radio documentary series, including One Blue Sky, Health and the Human Environment. Dr. Musil is two-time winner of the Armstrong Award for Excellence in Radio Broadcasting. He also serves as president of the Herbert R. Scoville Peace Fellowship, chairman of the Board of Counsel for a Livable World, and chairman of the board of the Population Connection Action. Please welcome Dr. Robert Musil.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Thank you for that very kind introduction, Ashley. And Dr. Johnson, thank you. To have an introduction that long, you have to be incredibly old. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But first of all, I wanted to let you know, you heard all that stuff about radio. I'm terrified of live audiences, so please be kind. That was a joke, but there will be no more jokes after this. But what I want to do now, just very briefly before we begin, before the clock starts ticking, is an old-fashioned kind of organizing tool. My main work these days is as the head of the Rachel Carson Council. We organize in North Carolina around environmental justice and nationally as well. So I'm going to hand around a sign-up sheet. You probably know that if you sign this, you will become active in the Rachel Carson Council. We have a campus network of over 5,000 students and growing, and you'll get newsletters, alerts, opinions, calls to action. If you do sign and you make a mistake, you can always unsubscribe. But I'm going to pass that around. Please, if you're interested, print your name, put your email, and then we will be linked for quite a while. So, there you go. But I'm not going to take a collection. Don't go.
oh, you're in the poll.
I go, yeah, you know. To be here at Bennett and in the pulpit. It happens that I come from a long line of ministers, including my mom, who was a United Church of Christ minister, a pioneer, and worked in civil rights throughout the country and in New York. My cousins, uncles, grandfather, and many, many before that, but you can relax. I am not a preacher, though I occasionally am called to do my secular ministry as one. more seriously, as we are here in the Pfeiffer Chapel, I want to say how honored I am to stand here in this pulpit. As I came here last night, I of course was staying right around the corner from the International Civil Rights Center and Museum, the old Woolworths. And I've since come to understand and learn that it was not just the Greensboro Four who were sitting in and active there. It was Bennett Bells, perhaps a dozen or so. I was also struck by the role of Dr. Esther Terry, whose quote I just love. Activism, she said, is rooted in social justice. And you probably also know that in this very chapel, I'm standing where Dr. Martin Luther King stood and preached before the March for Jobs and Freedom in Washington, where my mother's minister stood near Dr. King. I watched on television, but it certainly had a profound impact on me. But if you recall what Dr. King said, it sort of relates to why I am here today. You know, he was quoting the Reverend Theodore Parker, a militant abolitionist and Unitarian minister who went and rescued a fugitive slave who had been put in jail. Reverend Parker was armed and released that slave. He is the one that Martin was quoting when he says, "The moral arc of the universe bends long, but it bends toward justice." That call from Dr. King resonates today as we stand, as Dr. Johnson was saying, facing incredible continuations of the need for struggle in this country. Even now, veterans of Mississippi Summer are at the University of Mississippi with current students there registering and working, just as I know many of you are. I am frankly shocked and disappointed that in 2018, many of the gains that your predecessors worked for are at risk. And that is why I really have come to Bennett College, to enlist you in a lifelong struggle of learning and struggle and civic engagement and civil rights and justice and the environment, which are all linked inextricably in one cause, one movement. And our task today and as we go forward is to make sure that those movements are combined, that they're not separated, that they are not pitted against each other, that women and civil rights and LGBTQ and environmentalists and people who work on poverty and jobs are part of one big, powerful movement that is as needed now, perhaps more, than 2 generations ago when I sat here at a chapel in a university that I'm currently a little bit embarrassed about, called Yale University, where I was privileged to hear Dr. Martin Luther King. As you know, many college students went south. Many in my university were inspired by Dr. King. I take it that Brett Kavanaugh never has been. However, I want to link this chapel, Dr. King, to the work that I do now with the Rachel Carson Council. How many of you could not write a 1,000-word essay on the importance of Rachel Carson, who she was, what she did, and so on? The correct answer is don't know. Okay. Well, and how in the world does that relate to what we're doing here and the issues that we face today? Let me give you a little quick Rachel Carson 101. Rachel Carson grew up in a poor farm outside of Pittsburgh and became enamored of the oceans by reading, in those days, romantic and Victorian literature. She had never seen the sea. She could quote Emily Dickinson, "I never saw the sea, I never saw a moor, and yet know I how the heather looks, and what a wave must be." Her sense of imagination led her to be an English major at a women's college, and I should add, I am doubly pleased to be here at Bennett as one of only 2 historically black colleges for women. And that's what part of the reason I wrote a book called Rachel Carson and Her Sisters, because Rachel Carson inspired me as well as Dr. King, a diminutive woman about 5'4", pale as a white person can be, with freckles and auburn hair, dare not go in the sun, but she spent her time around the beaches and gathering and writing about the oceans. She became famous, this is on the final, for writing a book called Silent Spring in 1962. Imagine what is happening is that the civil rights movement is at its peak. Radioactive fallout is showering down across the land because of our open-air nuclear testing of over 1,000 nuclear weapons. And Rachel wrote this book, Silent Spring, that exposed chemical corporations and their spraying and use of chemicals, DDT and dieldrin and heptachlor and many, many others, to the point that robins and other birds were dying on the lawns of campuses. Some of the best studies of why this was happening at Rachel's time were at Michigan State, where the robins just rolled over on their backs and died right there. And it took some serious scientific research to discover that it was from the chemicals from the chemical companies, and that is who Rachel Carson named. And because she was a woman, the chemical companies not only threatened to sue her to prevent publication of Silent Spring, they sent out paid hacks and scientists in white coats who were in the employ of the chemical companies. This may sound familiar to her, and they ridiculed her as a woman. She was single and childless. One of these pompous asses said, "How can a woman without children tell us about the future?" They hurled epithets at her. One of the favorites from those days was spinster. They called her a spinster. That was not only an unmarried woman, it was the implication that Rachel was unwomanly. Her closest friends and colleagues, dearest friends, were women who worked closely with her in movements for the environment and for justice. So now you know Rachel Carson. She was an incredibly popular nature writer who, when she wrote Silent Spring, was listened to because she was so famous. In fact, you have to imagine that when Silent Spring came out, it was on the New York Times bestseller list for nearly 2 years. And at a press conference in Washington, you know how reporters can be, John F. Kennedy's holding one of his frequent press conferences, and he could actually talk, unlike some press conferences we could name. And the reporter says, Mr. President, we're hearing a lot about pesticides. Are you going to be doing anything about that?" And he says, "Why, yes, you must be talking about Miss Carson's book, Silent Spring. I'll be forming a task force and we'll be looking into that." Can you imagine if Donald Trump said Rachel Carson and Her Sisters is a lousy book, it's lousy, he's low energy, it's bad, don't buy Musil's book? I would be a rich man right now, which I am not. But that's the power that Rachel brought to this movement. But how does that connect to justice and racism and civil rights? Rachel was determined to fight particularly around the environment. But I want you to know that most people who do know about Rachel Carson are unaware that she was deeply steeped in racial justice. When she was a graduate student at Johns Hopkins, she had a full fellowship that didn't pay enough. She had to have a half-time job, teach 2 part-time jobs while commuting by bus around Baltimore, and she worked for 2 of the most prominent biologists in the world, half-time, while trying to write her dissertation. The Pearls, Raymond and Maud Pearl. They, like most biologists of the time, believed in the theory of eugenics. Eugenics? I could do my Ferris Bueller bit. Anyone? What is eugenics? Obviously, it is the racial theory that believed that we needed to improve the human race by preventing undesirable folks to recreate themselves. And that, of course, meant the desirable race was white or Aryan. The defectives included people with mental health problems, with supposedly low IQs because they'd never had an education. And these two biologists were the first world prominent ones to break with eugenics and say, this is hogwash. It's racist. We have studied the genetics, we have looked at all of the science, and as human beings, we now denounce eugenics. And the two of them, white biologists, prominent, joined the NAACP. These were the folks that Rachel worked with every day and struggled with these questions while she was studying genetics, and came out with them and said, it is hogwash. Move a little forward faster to the time when Martin Luther King was standing here. Actually, in 1957, Rachel Carson was just beginning Silent Spring. Her literary agent and closest friend, a woman named Marie Rodell, brought to publication and helped promote the very first book of a then unknown Baptist preacher. The book was Stride Toward Freedom, Martin Luther King. I do know that Rachel Carson had an FBI file. I do not know if, like Martin, it was for similar reasons, but I know at those times she was close to and deeply involved with people who were close to Martin and doing civil rights. In her case, it took the form, and she was raised a Presbyterian minister grandfather, and a brilliant woman who went to the best available education for women in the late 19th century in Pennsylvania. It was called the Washington Female Seminary. The boys that were adjacent had their own college, but women went to the female seminary, and her mother was so brilliant that they allowed her to take a few courses at the men's college. Wasn't that nice of the boys? In any case, her mother took Rachel and poured all of this learning into her. She became a teacher, and when you got married in those days, you had to quit. And so Rachel Carson was absorbing all of these values through her grandfather, and particularly for her mother, of compassion and mercy and empathy and caring about others. And particularly, now I'm going to preach from Matthew 25. Inasmuch as you have done it unto the least of these, you have done it unto me. For Rachel, the least of these was any human being, no matter where they lived, no matter who they were, no matter what their genetics were supposed to be. It also included any animal, any fish, any bird, every creature that God and science and evolution had made. They were bound together, and her ethic was to do no harm to any of them. She, in fact, was the first person, the first woman, who happened to be the first person to do a serious critique of industrial hog farms, chicken farms, turkey farms that we have in North Carolina here today. She wrote a powerful introduction to a book called Animal Machines by another woman named Ruth Harrison, and described what it was like and how awful. This was new, and there weren't very many then, and how the animals were jammed together and caged up and fed with hormones and antibiotics, and it had harmed the animals, it harmed the people around them, it harmed the atmosphere. This was Rachel Carson in 1964. This intro to Animal Machines came out just after she died of breast cancer in 1963. Rachel also happened to know and care about nuclear weapons. She was deeply opposed to nuclear weapons and their testing from their earliest tests. She was concerned about animal welfare and CAFOs and the rest. She actually knew about global climate change during the Kennedy administration. That may surprise you because we think of that something that we learned later. But she had a good friend who helped discover the scientific basis of climate change, and so she was concerned about that as well. So all of these issues she saw as linked and worked on them, and that is why the Rachel Carson Council, where I have been inspired by Dr. King, by Rachel Carson, and others, see these issues as linked. It is why one of the first things that we did when I began to, frankly, revive the organization 4 years ago was to focus on North Carolina. I had worked with a wonderful epidemiologist and social justice champion at UNC Gilling School of Public Health, Steve Wing. Dr. Steve Wing was his name. I know he's worked with Dr. Johnson and many other people around here. He and his graduate students not only were studying the health effects of hog CAFOs, but also their effects on the atmosphere, on global climate change, and importantly for our purposes, he and his graduate students did GIS mapping and studies, historical and contemporary, and discovered that will not surprise you, but surprise many, that the highest concentration of hog CAFOs, and there are maps in a report we did some time ago, and there are takeaways outside that have this in it. The densest concentration of hog farms mapped exactly with the densest areas of slavery in North Carolina, which map, of course, with Jim Crow and segregation, and in this case, with African American and increasing Latino and some indigenous peoples who live around these incredible, huge, stinking messes run by giant corporations. And that is played out again. We worked on another report. I just want to show you this one. I wrote the bad pun in the title, Foul Matters. You know that they're not just hog CAFOs, that there are chicken CAFOs. In fact, there's a major facility on the edge of Guilford County for Tyson, but all of these facilities together hold millions of chickens similarly jammed into these horrible conditions. And you know now what Hurricane Florence has done, as thousands and thousands of hogs and millions of chickens and turkeys have been killed. Their waste spread across the land, causing harm not just to the animals, but to the people who live and have no choice. The CAFOs moved in where people lived. And so, as we go forward with the Rachel Carson Council, and where I hope you will join with me and many, many others in your work and in your lifetimes, is this year we are focusing on several counties in which all of the problems, environmental serious ones, in North Carolina come together. Again, you will not be surprised that there are particular counties where the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, look, I do sing, and I may sing along with the phone, look out. Never mind, we won't sing, I'll restrain myself. But here we are, because the Rachel Carson Council is not huge, but we work with the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network and many other organizations around the state. We will be focusing on areas, catch this, the people who plan these things, who own these things, know what they're doing. The Atlantic Coast Pipeline is supposed to come down through North Carolina and deliver fracked natural gas to help the economy. They don't mention much in this report that we also did called Blast Zone, that they take people's property by eminent domain, that they clear and blow up a mile-wide area where the pipes will go, that other facilities are needed to get the natural gas where you want it and all of that. Those include liquid natural gas facilities, compressor stations, and a whole host of facilities that are dangerous to human health, the atmosphere, and climate change. Then, of course, we have coal ash, which you know about. And all of these are focused in the counties we want to work in and where I hope you will continue to be interested. I have a North Carolina state organizer, Elijah Brunson, who will come here to Bennett, and that you can sign up with. You can mentor high school students to learn about this so that you have an active role in building the next generation, because you're getting older. And all of that. Example, Northampton County. Oh, and wood pellets is one other problem. I'm sorry, I skipped along there. Not by train, but they ship wood pellets overseas so that European countries can meet their climate goals under the Paris Agreement by burning supposedly efficient wood pellets that are gotten by clear-cutting North Carolina forests. And that process, of course, decimates the landscape, ruins the ability of forests to suck up carbon dioxide and help with the air and climate change, and creates incredible pollution as that's happening. Is actually worse than coal. All of these facilities are located, take Northampton County for example. They have CAFO's wood pellet production and a liquid natural gas compressor. In Sampson County, they got wood pellets and CAFO's. In Robeson County, they're going to build a liquid natural gas facility. If you don't know, that could be easily blown up or blow up. Natural gas, of course, is flammable, ignitable. It is right next to an elementary school where this is all planned in Robeson County, which you may know is almost half indigenous people, the Lumbee Nation. The other counties that I mentioned are predominantly and disproportionately poor African American. This story is so familiar. Do they mean to hurt us? Is this what they're doing? You better believe it. The guys in their boardrooms believe they will get less opposition. They're people who count less, who have less voice in Raleigh and in Washington. And part of the reason the Racial Carson Council also lobbies and works on politics is not just to educate, inspire, organize, march, but also to hold accountable those politicians who are also responsible for all of this. And so we have worked, again, with other organizations, and sometimes with Governor Cooper, at the urging of a growing movement for environmental justice here in North Carolina. He vetoed H.R. 467, which would have prevented people living near the CAFOs from bringing suit for nuisance. In some, their homes are practically unlivable, their property values sink because of the CAFOs there. He vetoed it, and your legislature, the one we are going to throw out in your lifetimes, not in mine, said, oh, no, you can't do that. And so there was a compromise. Some of the suits were able to go forward. They were actually settled. There were some fairly serious damages. And of course, those were all reduced. And the guys came back. And I mean, these bills are written by the Smithfield Corporation, that is a branch of WH Group, a Chinese holding company that bought Smithfield for nearly $6 billion and most of the 9 million hogs in North Carolina. And they hand these bills. Representative Dixon over in eastern North Carolina, who just happens to own a CAFO, he said on the floor of your assembly, my grandchildren don't seem to mind. They don't mind the smell. I take them out there, no problem. I like hog poop. So those went forward. They were somewhat successful. And so another bill came forward in the Farm Bill, SB 711. Again, preventing people from suing for damages to their property, their lives, simply by having a CAFO move in next to them. Governor Cooper vetoed it, and it was overridden. And so we come down to today. where my life, your life, the people whom you may not know in those counties and across North Carolina, and frankly across the land, North Carolina is not the only place where this is going on, need you and me to feel the spirit that must have been with those early bells when they were sitting in and picketing and registering along with the Greensboro Four. We need to feel the spirit of the people who have stood and preached in this pulpit, in this very place. Dr. King, Jesse Jackson, and many, many others. That is what we are called to do, and you, as Bennett women, whose mission is to be leaders, to care for social justice and civic engagement, I know you will want to go forth from this place and in this time and lead the marches and the sit-ins and the voter registration and all that is absolutely necessary if we are ever to bend the moral arc of the universe. Dr. King, Dr. Parker before him knew that the universe's arc did not bend simply by physics. It bent because we acted, we moved, we joined together, we fought, we died for these issues. That is where we are today. Rachel Carson, throughout much of the time I'm talking about, was dying of breast cancer, misdiagnosed and hidden from her by a male white physician, one of my guys. Sorry, we don't tell little old women about what they got. And so she had metastasizing breast cancer while writing Silent Spring, while carrying out her work. She therefore only got to give one commencement address in her life. It was to a women's college, Scripps College for Women in California. She was suffering inside, but at the conclusion she said, "Your generation must deal with the environment and face the facts, and ignorance is not enough. We must act on this. It is your generation who must care, who must move." That was my generation 2 generations ago. And the arc has not bent enough. I need you to help bend that moral arc so the universe will bend toward justice. I will follow you. I will walk with you. I will sit in with you. I will lobby with you. I will vote with you. I will move with you throughout Greensboro and beyond in carrying out this work. I like to think I have a couple of decades left in me. Frankly, when one of you is the governor of North Carolina or the president of Bennett College, you can wheel me in, and I will be so proud to see what you have done to move that moral arc. I want to be here with you, and I want to follow you out of this chapel and on into freedom. Thank you. Couldn't find the time. Do we have?
We have time.
All right.
What we'd like to do now is to open up the time for question and answer, but before we do that, we have our Dean of Faculty here, Dr. Annette Wilson, and if you have a few words or if you want to open us up with questions, you're welcome to do so. If not, I got a question.
College environment. Tyson planted my little Diddy Road Church in Scotty, North Carolina, and we had to move across the street so that Tyson could build a larger plant. I'm going to leave that, I'll send it, we can research it, and we moved our church on our own. So that's my opening up to how things can come to pass. So just sharing that as an action. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. get to my question, I want to hear from you all. Do you have any questions? Or any kinds of comments? Because this is something that is impacting us as we speak. Just as Dr. Wilson talked about Tyson Foods coming in and swallowing up her small church. These farms that Dr. Muse was talking about, these huge giant CAFOs, they're confined, animal operating.
Feeding operation, yeah.
Feeding operation, they're huge, they stink. I've smelled them, they're horrible.
There we go.
These scooped up our small farm. So stand up and speak really loud so we can get the question.
Well, hi, my name is Lisa. I don't really have a question, I have a comment about what you were talking about. Those plants that you were talking about, like the pork plants, they're killing people here in North Carolina due to the air and it's causing lots of cancer. So when you're saying that they're coming to build something else in the smaller towns, because that's where some of my family lives at, by like Robinson County, it's gonna cause these people to get sicker and sicker until they perish away, and then their land and their homes will all be swept away, so these corporations could build larger plants and things like that. So basically, it's just killing our people and sweeping it under the rug. Yeah, and no one says anything about it, but it's happening. It's going on.
Thank you. One thing thank you so much. When they say no one is talking about it, you all know about fake news. It's just fake news. We, of course, have a problem that we are all here alive in this chapel where Dr. King was. No one outside will know that. You don't see 12 TV cameras because I'm some, I don't know, sexual predator. News follows the powerful, the bizarre, but there are people all over this country, and in more than the thousands and thousands in my group, in the millions who know about these subjects. Part of the reason that the Rachel Carson Council and the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network and others work is to funnel all of those views and those voices of people into the places of power. I do that in Washington, D.C. You can be sure. These reports are in the congressional record with progressive Congress people who put them there, and they are just waiting for you to go out and vote and make a Congress that would actually then do something about it, aside from just tell people. But there are many, many people who do know, but don't be fooled because we're not going to be on the evening TV. But thank you. Yeah. Oh. Oh, the radio.
Excellent question. This is Bob Musel, broadcasting direct from the Pfeiffer Chapel.
The simple answer was the radio and all of that. I was the producer and host and many other things of a syndicated radio program that went for about 15 years and then stopped. So it was an independently produced, think of, I don't know if you listen to Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman, etc. It was in that vein. There were 150 stations, several million listeners, etc. It is not on the air now. I do voiceovers occasionally on films and documentaries. So if, yeah, but on the radio, I'm having a little trouble. Did it cover issues like this? Or? Oh yeah, and gave voice to people who weren't in the mainstream media. It focused predominantly on peace, justice, the environment, women, and progressive economics. That's what you got. And there were some pretty famous people on there, but they weren't always carried on the evening news. Yeah, okay. Oh, I'm a bad host here. You're gonna have to shout at me, I must be. Is the question why so few?
Yes.
Ah.
What is your view on why the numbers are so low in the state of North Carolina?
Well, in North Carolina actually reflects a lot of the nation. People, of course, unfairly focus on younger people. I think you all know that there have been increasing coordinated, careful efforts to try to suppress voting, particularly amongst people who might vote against the people in power now, people of color, younger people, etc., through obviously the Voting Rights Act that so many people suffered and died for was undone, so that states that have a history of suppressing the vote don't have to do that anymore. That's part of the reason. I also think a lot of, I ask, we don't have time here, I do ask college students, so, what do you think about politics? Do you follow politics? Do you care at all? And I mean, yes, but it's so depressing and difficult and hard to know and yada, 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 that you may be an unusual audience, but it finally has an effect on democracy when people feel that even voting may not change things and may not change the powers that be. So that's another piece of it. The other part, of course, and that what I and others worry about this particular election is an off-year election, no presidential election. And there the figures are even lower. And for young people, they can be in the teens, not their years, but in turning out to vote. So, but I think the suppression should let you know just how powerful the vote can be. I could talk for hours on that one, but but did you want to add something to that? Yeah, it would look like you were strong.
Could you speak just a little bit about the Nobel Peace Prize and that?
Oh, the Nobel Peace Prize. I should make very clear that I am not an individual winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, unlike Dr. King or Mother Teresa or Bishop Tutu. I've known many of the people because my organization won the Nobel Peace Prize. It was considered very, very controversial at the time because the group that I ran, Physicians for Social Responsibility, worked against open-air nuclear testing, as did Rachel Carson. And to make a long story short, this doctors group that I ran at the time went back and forth with the Soviet Union, worked together with doctors to try to get a test ban treaty, and ultimately mobilize millions of doctors around the world to oppose open-air nuclear testing. And so, when I say it's controversial, that prize was shared with the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, which included the Russians, the commies. And so, that's what it was for, but that does not give me tremendous sympathy for, say, Dr. Jill Stein, who ran on the Green Party ticket, who was hanging out with Putin most of the time. I'm sorry if I know her because she was in my organization. Anyhow, That's it in a nutshell. I could do thousands of imitations, it's terrible, of the Nobel Peace Prize winner. I have many favorite ones. My younger daughter is still angry that we thought she was too young to go see Bishop Tutu at an evening thing where I gave him another award. The older sister did. The younger sister has not forgiven me, I think, that she didn't get to stay out late and see Bishop Tutu. But my favorite, I'm just going to embellish, is the Dalai Lama, or one of my favorites. I didn't even know who the Dalai Lama was when I first met him at a Nobel Prize thing. He entered saffron robe, shaved head, other guys with saffron robes, and this is the Dalai Lama in a nutshell. Before long, I'll stop there. You got everybody chuckling and feeling good, it's just amazing. He also was deeply involved in science. I have a friend now deceased, a doctor, who explained to the Dalai Lama and his assembled monks about the actual scientific basis of conception. And then they all got in a circle and spoke Tibetan. And he turns around and says to this friend of mine, "We have just changed thousands of years of our theology and practice because of what you have said about how and when conception comes together." And I'll leave the conception part out now. They had a different idea. Any other questions? How are we doing here? All right, who was Rachel Carson? It's a trick question.
She realized the pesticides were killing birds.
Exactly. Very good. And harming people. That's the final thing. We'll call that a question. People, and then we gotta quit. People did not put together concern for nature. A lot of environmentalists were just for the birds, the bunnies, the whales, the polar bears, but not people. We're creatures. All the chemicals go through us. They all harm us, not just the robins who drop dead. So Rachel was the first credible scientist with an incredibly popular following who got to testify and that said, no, this is all together. And Silent Spring is filled with chapters about what chemicals do to the humans involved and the robins and the birds. So we are in this together with the little folks too. Thank you.
Can we all give our speaker a round of applause?
Dr. Musil will be over in the Student Union. He does have his books available, some of the books that we mentioned, for you to...
They make great presents for your parents. Or any other older people that you know.
Well, thank you. Would you like to present on? I guess we can present out. I would love that. We'll process it out. And then we'll leave it in the hands of the marshals. Okay.
Good morning. Hello, ladies. I know we've had a very long morning, but thank you so much. We do still have a few announcements, but at this time, can the faculty and staff and guests of the college, you are now dismissed. Assisting us today with our announcements will be our Miss Junior, Miss Ebony Duell. She'll come to you now. Followed by Miss Ebony Duell's announcements with me, we will have our announcement with our provost, Dr. Linster. So if you could just hold tight. Thank you guys so much for your patience.
Good morning, everyone. Miss Bennett College Regale is 6 p.m. in the Global Center tomorrow evening. Oh, they can?
No, they can't hear you, girl.
Miss Bennett College Regale is tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. in the GLC. Saturday is Community Day Cookout at 11 a.m. on the Quad. Miss Bennett College coronation is at 7 p.m. that evening in the Annie Murner Pfeiffer Chapel, followed by a reception in the Global Learning Center. Follow after ACES can all marshals and the Royal Court meet with Reverend McLean. Also, we have this ID. Samaria Davis, you lost your ID if you're in here.
Thank you, Ebony. On September 30th, Sunday at 10 a.m. in the Annie Murner Pfeiffer Chapel, we will be having our Founders Day. At this time, we're asking for Dr. Linster to please come up and make the further announcements. Can we please give her a round of applause as she makes her way to the chancellors?
Good morning. How are you doing? Hello? How are you doing? Let's give our speaker another round of applause. And just to be brief, students, we know we're going to see you on Sunday. Founders Day program, 10 a.m. in this building. You are to meet in the gym at 9:15. You will be processing over. Attire, white dresses, black heels, flesh tone hose. And of course, you know, all of that information is in the ACES program and booklet, and that's located on the web. So if you have any questions, how many of you will I see there on Sunday?
And for the orientation students, you have an assignment associated with Founders Day. Just remind you of.
And please note, fresh women, you will have a special invitation from the president, so we know that we'll see you, as well as your big sisters, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you on Sunday.
Okay. Ladies, there's one final announcement. Reverend McLean asks that we all remain respectful during this ACES time. Today was a very special case. It was a little longer than we had anticipated, but she's asking that you be respectful to the guests and to the speakers, and that your phones do not go off, and that you're not on your phone during the ACES period. This is her request, and this is what her and the marshals are asking that you do, and that you continue to remain respectful during the ACES programs. At this time, you're in the hands of the marshals. You have a wonderful day. Sabria, you could do 2 rows. You could do 2 rows.